Hi, everyone, and welcome to DesignTV by SANDOW. I'm Avi Rajagopal, Editor-in-Chief of Metropolis. We have a very special segment for you today. How can we all fight the climate crisis? Produced in partnership with Interface. I have two fantastic guests for you today, both leaders in the sustainability movement. My first guest is Dr. Katharine Wilkinson, an author, strategist, and teacher. Her books on climate include the best-selling anthology, All We Can Save. Dr. Wilkinson leads the All We Can Save project, which she co-founded with Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson in support of women leading on climate. She also co-hosts the fantastic podcast, A Matter of Degrees, telling stories for the climate curious with Dr. Leah Stokes. My second guest for today is Lisa Conway, who is the VP of Sustainability at Interface, the global flooring manufacturer whose mission is climate take back. Today, Lisa and Katharine are going to talk about how all of us get involved in the fight against the climate crisis and what we can each do in our professional capacities. So Katharine and Lisa, I'd love to hear how you both got started in the climate movement. Katharine, maybe you want to start us off.
Sure, Avi, I'd be happy to. Well, I think like a lot of people, I had some really formative educational experiences, some really formative teachers who helped plant the early seeds of this journey for me. Specifically, when I was 16, I spent a semester at this really amazing school called the Outdoor Academy in Western North Carolina. I lived in the woods with 25 kids, and sustainability was a through line in every course, from art to science to literature, in the way we functioned as a community, and also in the ways we engaged kind of beyond the campus. And one of the moments that happened during that time was that I visited a clear cut for the first time. I was from right in town in Atlanta. I had not laid eyes on the ways that kind of the extractive economy can show up in rural communities and on the land. And it was a very kind of politicizing and convicting moment for me, and also a moment of just a lot of sadness. And I had this hand-bound journal that I still have and return to sometimes. And I scrawled in there, I want to help the world be connected to the earth, change the way I live. And that has taken lots of different iterations in the last now more than 2 decades of doing this work in one way or another. But that really kind of set me on a trajectory where I knew that this would somehow be my life's work.
Yeah. Lisa, what was your moment?
Yeah, so a little different. Didn't happen. I think it hit me like a ton of bricks, honestly. I didn't have interest in or knowledge of sustainability until I got to Interface. And I was recruited as a salesperson, and it wasn't really until I got here that I decided to really learn more about the company. I was in my 20s. I wasn't all that deep. But it's not everywhere, or it's not every day that you get somewhere where the company founder has actually written a book. And Ray Anderson, the founder of Interface, his first book was called Mid-Course Correction. And that's when I really realized, kind of along with him, as I read about his spear in the chest moment, kind of had my own, and realized that I didn't want to just sell flooring. I always wanted my career to be meaningful. And I realized really what a gem I stumbled upon being at Interface and getting to live that every day. So very fortunate, but it didn't take long for me to make it about more than just my work life, this climate work.
Lisa, I've only known you as like a sustainability queen, so it's very hard for me to imagine.
I know.
Earlier,
it weirds people out. They're like, "Wait, you weren't like the recycling guru when you were 7? What do you mean?"
Lisa, you've had a fantastic year at Interface. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, for somebody who started out not in the sustainability world, you've made some amazing breakthroughs.
Yeah. From I mean, I used to get excited about, recycled content. It's kind of like where we all start in product manufacturing. That's like, just to watch it go up year after year, you get excited. But in about 4 years ago, we had launched Climate Takeback, which was our mission to reverse global warming. And it wasn't until this past year where we had a product that embodied that I think it really made it sticky, both for our own associates, but then also our customers. And that is creating the world's first carbon negative carpet tile, which you think can only happen with purely natural products. Think of things like wool or like hempcrete and things like that. The fact that we could take something that was originally, back 40 years ago at Interface, entirely oil derived, right? And over time, disconnecting us from the virgin oil well, but using those recycled materials, it lowers and lowers and lowers the carbon footprint, but you can't get to carbon storing without the use of bio-based. So now the real innovation is this beautiful combination of old products combined with bio-based materials. So think of agricultural waste and rapidly renewable plants. And that means that every carpet tile that we make actually stores more carbon to make it than is actually emitted to produce the tile. So that means this bodes well for those in the manufacturing community, in the consumer side, B2B side, like we are, doesn't matter. There's always this like, well, how are we going to grow sales, but have a positive impact, right? That means that this is possible for our culture. We're not going to tomorrow turn off the need for new stuff. We still have to reduce. Science is telling us we have to reduce, but science is also telling us, I'm being a scientist here, Katharine, excuse me. I'm taking your role for a second.
I'm delighted, Lisa.
But science is also telling us that we have to make use of this waste carbon that's in the atmosphere. So it's not just about reduction, but also about what we call loving carbon, changing our relationship with carbon and using it as a resource instead of only treating it as the enemy. So that's the exciting innovation we're gonna ride into the future here.
First of all, congratulations! What an amazing achievement this year, and to go through that journey and finally get to breaking through a barrier that we all thought existed, and then you think about it differently, and you suddenly realize, there's a way to push past it, And Katharine, reading through your book, All We Can Save. It's incredible how many stories there are of women in the climate justice movement who've done just that, who've thought about a problem in a different way, who've thought about a barrier in a different way, who've taken something that, two systems that were previously considered incompatible, and then found a third way that points a way forward for the climate movement. Tell us about All We Can Save. Tell us about the book, the project, how it came together, and what you're working on now.
Sure. Well, for those who aren't familiar with it, hopefully you will get familiar with it. All We Can Save is an anthology, a collection of essays and poetry and art created by 60 women who, as you said, Abhi, are sort of leading in climate in all different ways. The book project really was kind of born out of both inspiration and frustration. So inspiration because there is this incredible community that is rising to meet this moment, right? I think of it as like this great ecosystem of transformation. And there's so much there to celebrate and share the wisdom of and the work of, but also some frustration about how the climate conversation has often been shaped to date. And I think we're seeing a lot of shifts in this, but, a lot of the sort of talking heads and quote unquote thought leaders, who have said, this is how we think about the problem. This is how we think about solutions. Most of them have been men and most of them have been white. And that's great. We want white people and men, everyone on the team. But it takes a kaleidoscope of perspectives, not just from different identities and lived experiences, but skill sets and training and sectors. And like, we can't see something as complex as the climate crisis through a single set of lenses. And so in a lot of ways, All We Can Save is an attempt to create a kaleidoscope that you can keep turning and see something more clearly because you're seeing it through a different set of lenses. And of course, the sort of mission of centering the work and wisdom of women in climate work is bigger than an anthology. If only one book could sort of land and sort things out. But so we're really continuing that work through the All We Can Save project, which is a new baby nonprofit organization. And we're kind of continuing the creative communication work. We're doing some work around education and curriculum. We have All We Can Save reading circles that have now been happening for, we're right at a year from when we launched them. So people coming together into deeper dialogue about the climate crisis, using this book as kind of a jumping off point for some of that relational work that we know is so important in movements for social change. So lots of good stuff, and lots to come, probably, in the great spirit of emergence. Things that we don't know yet will be coming. But we know that there has long been a leadership crisis at the heart of the climate crisis, and that it is going to take the biggest and strongest team we can possibly muster to turn this thing around.
I just have to chime in, Avi, because this book is just so, there are so many people working on climate that don't have titles, right? They don't have climate titles. They don't have a sustainability title like mine. And you can see yourself in these women in different ways. There are engineers that in book context are poets, and like, there are just so many creative ways that I think women show up for this movement. And I think need to have the confidence that they can do the work, that they're already doing some of the work, and really find those role models that they might not have heard of, because we've been told who the climate heroes are. Yeah. So it's just, I just can't recommend it enough. And it was so refreshing to hear so many different voices within the anthology, instead of just one, you're used to usually kind of one voice.
In a way, it's our way of thinking about leadership also that has brought us to the climate crisis.
Yeah.
We've been content to let people who hold positions of power continue to, do things that they think is best. And, I'll impute them good intentions. I will say, yes, they were going for profit, but they thought profit was a good thing, and we know now that we have to think about leadership differently. Pew Research last year did some polling and found that 2/3 of Americans now say they can feel the effects of climate change in their communities. So we all sense it now. It's become so tangible. It's come close to us. It touches our skin. How do we get started? What do we do?
I think maybe it's uniquely feminine. Maybe it's not. But I like doing this with a buddy or buddies. Katharine's one of my buddies, Stacey Smedley's one of my buddies. Katharine did All We Can Save with Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. I think that we have to have fun. I always say we have to have fun. But really, like, if we don't make this work enjoyable, it's really hard. And I think that, you know, whether it's the book coming together, it's some things that I've done on my side, like the Materials Carbon Action Network, you know, having groups of people that have a shared purpose, I think make the work not only tolerable, but enjoyable. It feels a lot more possible. And I think that we feed off of each other. So, and that kind of actually gets back to your kind of zeroing in on that leadership issue, is that leadership isn't about a single person. Leadership at Interface wasn't only about Ray. We had an awful lot of other people step up, you know, that didn't get the kudos. So, so that's what I would say is we're all in this together and we all have to do it together. So find your buddies, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's such good advice. And yeah, just on the leadership point, Avi, I totally agree. The leadership crisis is far beyond the climate movement issue. It is, you know, when we look at virtually every decision-making space, where in almost every decision-making space, we're making climate-related decisions. And we've got still this persistent focus on, you know, short-term profit, prestige, power, things that are not landing us in such a good place at the moment. And I think the counterpoint to that I feel so enlivened by is that I hear so many more people asking, what can I do? How can I help? How can I be part of this work? And that is, to me, that's where possibility lives in all of this. And so I was hearing this question so much that I spent some time thinking about, well, how have I held the question of what can I do? And I published a piece with Time in July with kind of 5 steps for not coming to a definitive and forever answer to that question, because I think the reality is it'll be a question that we live for the rest of our lives, because this work of coming back into balance with the planet's living systems is complex and it's going to be a long journey. But the first one is to feel your feelings, right? That, like, we know from the world's traditions, and increasingly science is also clued into this, right? That we are deeply interconnected. And so of course we are feeling the pain that is unfolding on this planet to human and non-human beings. Tap into that, because that is fuel, right? And that is telling us something important. Then it's to scout your superpowers, right? You know, whatever they are, we need them in this work, from hardcore engineers on one side to artists and poets on the other. Are you great at rallying people? Are you great at raising money? Can you tell a good story, right? We need all of it and then some. So really thinking about what superpowers you want to bring to this party. And then surveying solutions. I mean, the amazing thing that was really the fun thing about the work that I did at Project Drawdown was just like getting to swim in this incredible toolbox of solutions that's already in hand, right? This is by and large not a solutions problem. It's a using solutions problem. And so, you know, seeing what's there, Drawdown review, you can download it for free at drawdown.org. Maybe there's an area of climate solutions that's going to really light you up. And then consider your context, right? Climate action is unfolding in companies, communities, cities, countries. What's happening around you that you can plug into? Chances are you've already gotten an invitation that maybe you just haven't taken up yet. And then the last is totally in line with what Lisa's advice was, which is to cultivate a climate squad. If you're facing a planetary crisis, probably best not to go it alone, but also the work is hard, right? And we can feel really small against this really big challenge. And in my experience, it's often that sense of friendship and collaboration and partnership that keeps me going when the work is hard and it feels like, you know, gosh, these are just tiny drops in a massive bucket. And people that you can have fun with. I am like totally here for that. We need a lot of joy in this work, because at the end of the day, we talk a lot about parts per million and, 1.5 degree future. And like, this is just, to me, really about a future that is life-giving, that is more life-giving than the present. And so I'm trying more and more to make sure that the work feels life-giving in the present, to make sure that it's, in integrity and in alignment with the kind of future we're trying to create.
I've had to learn the art of asking for help and understanding that people have to help me. I think that's a general society problem. I think it's also a male problem. And so we all have something we have to unlearn, and like finding buddies, learning how to play in the sandbox with others as we solve this problem, but also relying on each other. Lisa, the Carbon Action Network, Katharine with your reading circles, those kinds of community building things are not beside the point of the climate change movement. Neither are they strategies. In a way, they are the climate change movement, right? And I think that's really, that was the overwhelming sense I get as I read All We Can Save. It's just how in every case, it was about finding a group of people, connecting with them, and then using that to find your own purpose and do all the things that you said, Katharine. That's really important. So, I want to pull off one strand from that idea, which is this idea of how we can affect change in our professional lives. Those of us who are, in jobs, we often hear climate leaders say every job should be a climate job. And yes, that's absolutely true. At this point in time, if most of our actions are not geared towards, in some way contributing to the fight against the climate crisis, we're gonna still be in trouble. So can we talk about that? What can we do in our professional spheres? And also, how is that different from acting in a personal capacity?
Yeah, I think it can be, and I think that I'll probably say all organizations, certainly at Interface, we can do a better job of making sure that everyone really understands how their role in the organization contributes to our mission, in our case. I've seen so many sustainability jobs, like all of a sudden, and I know that there's, this big movement towards ESG, and, I certainly get that in the metrics and the reporting piece. I think that organizations may be wisening to the fact that you're more likely to get applicants for a job that has something meaningful in its title. So are we hiring, sustainable engineers all of a sudden? Or, are we hiring engineers and we just need people to apply? I think there's this reckoning that's happening, where people are starting to understand, how important every role is. And I think that if we're going to engage wherever we are, we have to be okay with being vulnerable. We have to be okay with not understanding what PPM stands for and ask, right? There's learning the language of carbon is so important. And we need accountants in that. We need HR. We need everybody, poets, all of it, because it's all related. And if we don't talk about it, there have been a few articles that I've read, and Katharine, I think that you might have even been one of the people that they asked, like, what is the one thing that one person can do, to reverse global warming? And it's like, talk about it, for God's sake, like,
yeah.
It has to be part of what we talk about more regularly, inside or outside of organizations.
And I think there's a question about the professional piece, which is, do I want to pursue climate from where I am currently in my current org and my current role? In almost every case, there's a lot of opportunity for that.
Yep.
And a lot of possibility for that. I think some of that is personal choice about like, does this feel like an ecosystem that's going to be down with real movement on climate? Am I willing to push an ecosystem that is, digging its heels in? But then there's a question of, do I look to go somewhere where I will be with more of my people, to move things forward. So those are some questions that I think are worth asking. There are a couple of resources that I really like. The Sunrise Movement put out this, it's a quiz, and like it took me back to 17 magazine days, called Green New Careers, greennewcareers.org. And it's fantastic. And it's imagining what our roles could be in the future, but actually they're quite archetypal. And so they're actually helpful in reinforcing for what we can do and be helpful with now. I was very happy that I should still be a communicator in this green new future. And then my former colleagues at Project Drawdown at Drawdown Labs just put out a really great resource called Climate Solutions at Work, which is really helpful, I think, for thinking through a framework of what can happen, particularly within companies, around emissions reductions, obviously, around things like climate disclosures, but also around engagement and collaboration and policy advocacy and products and partnerships and procurement and financing and investment and business model transformation. And like, you get a sense very quickly of how many footholds there can be within an organization, within a company. And a lot of those are, footholds that we haven't been thinking about. Like Lisa, you mentioned HR, right? Well, what if HR started to move towards like climate supporting benefits packages, right? What would that look like? What happens when we treat organizations as incredible spaces for the kinds of conversations you're talking about, Lisa, and also for education, right? This is something that Interface, I think, has done such amazing work on, right? We need literacy around this stuff to start, skyrocketing. Well, organizations are made for that. So all that to say, I don't think there is a simple answer, but I think the abundance of answers means that there's something there for everybody.
And it's your quote, Katharine, isn't it? If we're going to change everything, we need everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the things people can do is really like help articulate how what they do every day contributes or can contribute to climate action. It's something that everyone can take on.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Katharine. I'm gonna plug some things here. If you want to get involved with the All We Can Save project, allwecansave.earth. That's allwecansave.earth. Go ahead, join a reading circle, get involved with the movement. It's a great place to start. Interface's Carbon Love and Learns are a fantastic resource where incidentally, they actually use your book, Katharine, as part of the process. But please, if you're in the design industries, you're watching this or listening to this, if you're in architecture, interior design, any of the allied professions, Interface's Carbon Love and Learns, I would definitely recommend that. Yeah. If you're in interior design in particular, we've just launched the Interior Design Pledge for Positive Impact. It's a great way for you to articulate sort of a commitment to climate, health, and equity. Please check that out. That's on Metropolis's website, metropolismag.com/interior-design-pledge. But similarly, in almost every profession in the building industry, architects have the 2030 commitment and the AI 2030 challenge. Structural engineers have your own 2030 commitment. In the building industry, almost everyone has something that they can look to as a North Star. And then outside of the building industry, look for those frameworks, either within your organization or within your professional associations. That's another powerful source of camaraderie, community, and networking in the fight for climate justice. Thank you so much, Lisa and Katharine, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us. I hope you have a great day. Go do something. Go save something. Save us all.
No pressure.
Great to be with you, Avi.
Yeah, thank you, Avi.
I am so excited to have a conversation with you. But since it's my new house, do you mind if we do a little tour first?
Oh my gosh, well, it's so gorgeous. I'm so excited to see. Yes, let's do it. And it's going to be photographed in Luxe.
I know, I'm so thrilled. And so Pam, this is the living room. And I intentionally chose all the colors of the walls here because I wanted to accentuate the colors that are in the paintings.
It's so warm. I love this soft coloring in here.
Isn't it pretty? It's really the color of the background of some of the paintings.
I see that.
And then I've got this great room which was right next door to it. So this room was actually originally outside and it was enclosed, but it's wonderful because it's right off of the living room and yet it opens up to the outside. So oftentimes after work I'll come here and on my computer and it lets me be in the living room but also take advantage of the outside in the backyard.
Oh, the garden looks beautiful. We're here in your LA home. It's so warm. It's so elegant. You do comfortable elegance so well, Timothy. And also there is so much muted, warm, beautiful color. Talk a little bit about how you use color when you want to get sort of a comfortable elegance in a home. What's the art to that?
Well, it's interesting, Pam, because I've lived in Europe over half of my adult life. And one of the things I've noticed is that Europeans are actually much more comfortable with color. It's a part of their lives. I think that Americans, for the most part, are a little afraid of color. We're almost afraid of getting it wrong, if you will. And I think that what Europeans understand is that color actually gives life to a house. You look at a room that's all beige and cream or gray. I think they look beautiful in magazines. I'll look at them and I'll say, oh, isn't that a pretty room? But if you spend any time in one of those rooms, it actually starts over time to feel a little soulless. And it's because of that lack of color. Even if it's just a splash of color, it makes a difference. Nature gets it right. There's every shade of color in nature, and that they all work together. I don't even believe that one color can't be paired with another. I think sometimes bringing together two diametrically sort of opposed colors can be wonderful in a space. Yeah. So I think that it's really what colors you like and bringing those into the room. And I think that color is such an important part of a room. And frankly, paint is one of the easiest ways to do it. It's so easy just to add some splash of color through paint.
And we're here in your living room. It's so beautiful. Talk a little bit about the wall color. What color is it?
Great. So, it's interesting. My old house, I sold very quickly and I moved into a rental and didn't have time to find a great house. And I moved into a house that had the most sickly, grayish white walls. And I thought, well, it'll be interesting to live in a house with white walls. What I found was that the art just died. It literally, the color of the walls killed the art. And it was really when I, for the first time, realized how important color was to affecting the way you read art. So those walls would have been fine if I collected black and white photography. It would have been okay. But the grayness, the whiteness of them, actually, it killed the color of the art. So when I moved here, it was really one of the reasons I decided to move was to get a house that I could create a backdrop for my art collection. And I actually used the background colors in a number of these paintings in this room to determine the color. So this is Pittsfield Buff, which is a color from Benjamin Moore that I really love because it's a warm color and it's almost the color of a warm canvas. And so it really provides a great backdrop for the art in this room, which is predominantly 17th, 18th, and 19th century. So Pam, this is the dining room. And what I was really trying to channel here was Monet's kitchen at his house at Giverny with the yellow and blue. It brings it all together.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's so classic and elegant in here, Timothy.
And I tried to mix the blue on the curtains, that, again, then picked up in the Delft here.
And these portraits are beautiful in here.
I just love portraits. They tell so much of a history.
I agree.
Yeah. And this is the den or the family room. And I intentionally painted this a darker color because I think that every house should have a room that's a little cozier. It's more of a nighttime room. When I moved here, the walls were gray up through the paneling and then white above. It made the room feel very short. But by taking the same color and bringing it all the way up, it actually makes the room feel taller.
I love it. It feels like a cocoa bean. Is it ginger snap?
You are good. But absolutely, Benjamin Moore ginger snap.
Lovely.
Correct.
You know, we're in Los Angeles. You have your home here, you have your chateau in France, and your apartment in Paris. Right. I'm so interested in terms of how the environment in those three areas determine the colors and your palette, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, what's so interesting is that it comes back to light. It comes back to, so the light is so different in Southern California than it is in New York, or it is in Paris, or it is in the Loire Valley. So light is a key thing, but it's also what's outside the window that's reflecting that light. So if you're in the desert, for example, and you've got a lot of sand and things like that, that's gonna reflect, it's gonna change on the light inside the room. If there's a lot of green grass, if you're on a lake, you have to look at all those things. Interestingly, at my chateau, which I was painting in the last year, I have always loved the yellow, the famous yellow of Nancy Lancaster in London. So I actually went to Colfax and Fowler where they had that yellow room, and I used a Benjamin Moore color reader to exactly match the yellow, and I painted it in the Grand Salon and Chateau, and it looked horrible. And I thought, Tim, you're smart enough. You should have known that the color that is great for London, where it's dark and gray so much of the time, and there's a lot of buildings around it, is not going to look the same in a chateau that has all these windows that's in the Loire Valley where it's very sunny. So again, you have to always think about where you are and how the color is going to read in that place.
So it's interesting. We're in this space, which I'm looking at the wall color and I love it so much. It feels so perfect. It's a neutral. I feel like neutrals can be tricky. There's I don't know how many whites there are, right, but there's a lot of whites, and whites are tricky. So are bold colors. How can you advise homeowners to feel comfortable making color selection choices?
I think you really need to look at what do you want to feel in that room. People are always, they underestimate the power of color to shape emotions and your feelings. So if you say, I want that room to be one where there's great conversation and energy, then bring some red into that room. If you want it to be a room that's soothing and calm, then probably green is the right color. So look at what you want the room to evoke and what you want to feel in that room, and then use colors accordingly.
And then how do you narrow it down? So you'll start with that. I want something soothing. If you have a client or someone's doing it on their own, how can they narrow that down?
Well, again, I think it comes back to looking at what you want to feel. So blue is the world's favorite color. 35% of all people in the world say blue is their favorite color. And then they've gone into research have looked at it and said, well, why is it that blue is people's favorite color? It's because you associate it with things. You associate it with blue skies, sunny days, the water. So it connotes happiness. So again, come back to looking at how you want to feel in that room. Then once you get into that, once I know it's gonna be blue, then you can start to play with, I like this blue, or I like that blue, or I like this yellow or that yellow.
I want it more gray, I want it warm, I want it cool.
But come back to, and again, it's so easy. If you can just Google, say, meaning of the color red, and it'll tell you energy, excitement, hunger. Red's a great room for a dining room because it actually creates energy and power and people talking, but also eating.
Yeah. So it is so fascinating, just the color theory.
Absolutely. That's why there are grocery stores that often have the handles on the cart, are red, because you actually will buy more. Research is showing you actually buy more in a grocery store because it actually makes you hungry. this is my room, and I really wanted to create, again, that cozy feeling where all the colors sort of come together. But then there's some other little accent colors to add in.
Yeah, well, I love the wood grains in here, and also the touches of pink are beautiful.
Yeah, that's actually from my fabric for Schumacher. And again, it's got just the touches of pink and camel.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
This is so gorgeous, Timothy.
So this room I actually wanted to feel much lighter and more feminine than the rest of the house, to really go with the lighter furniture and the fabrics.
I love the wall color in
Isn't
here.
it pretty? This is Raspberry Ice by Benjamin Moore, and it's not pink, it's not purple, it's just this wonderful color that you can't really tell what it is, but it works so well with all the fabrics.
It feels like a little garden room in here. I just love it so much.
Oh, that's exactly what I wanted, yes! So this is actually the guest apartment, which is where I hope you will come and stay next time.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's a full apartment with kitchen and dining room. This is the living room. And again, I did this room in a more traditional white because I wanted it to feel a little more contemporary and to really work with the bold fabric on the curtain.
Beautiful, and the whole mix, the antiques and the little modern art touches, so gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
Advice for the color shy, which so many people are, and I think that we both agree that a white, just a barren white entire home,
Wow.
it needs a little bit of life
Yes,
to it.
absolutely.
So how can people be less color shy?
All right, so my rule of thumb is that there are basically 4 potential rooms in a house where you can actually go for some wow without worrying. Because they're the rooms that you're not spending a lot of time in, but they make impact. So an entrance hall. If you think about it, you're passing through that hall, but it actually makes a statement the second you walk in that door. The next is a powder room. You're not spending that much time in the powder room, but make it special, make it feel really unique. So you can do it with a great color, with a different wallpaper, but go for impact. But no one's spending that much time in that room that they'll become overwhelmed in it. The next, I think, is a dining room. Again, you're not spending that much time in the dining room, you're a couple hours at a time, and you want to create a special feeling in that room, whether it's just your family eating in it or for a special occasion. So a dining room is another place where you can safely add some color and add some drama. And the last place I would say is a guest room, because you actually want it to feel special. You want it to feel like they're not at home. Your guests are not at home, that they're someplace sort of special. It might be too overwhelming for you on a daily basis. That's fine, because you actually don't want your guests to stay forever. So you can go for some wow, and after a couple of days, they'll be ready to move on.
And a home needs these special moments
They
for
do.
yourself and for guests,
Absolutely.
honestly.
Absolutely. I think special moments throughout a home make it more special.
As do I. I am always a bit confused about which interior paint to use. It's like semi-gloss, high gloss. I mean, I've seen all of them. I love all the different finishes. How do you use them both on the interior and exterior in different homes? And when do you go for like a high gloss?
There are certain finishes that are just more practical. So on a doorway where you're pushing it, you're touching it, on the casing around it, much better to do it in a semi-gloss or a gloss, because it's easier to clean. A matte paint is actually inherently much more stainable. Your fingerprints show on it more. It's not as easy to clean off. So again, I look at those sorts of things. One of the things that Benjamin Moore has that I love is they've got a finish called Scuffex, which is for walls, but it's easy to clean off. And so at my chateau, I've done Scuffex on all the walls because I don't want to have to worry about handprints and fingerprints everywhere. I tend to use eggshell on ceilings. The reason I do that is that the light bounces off eggshell in a very subtle way. You can't even really tell that it's that much different than a matte, but it just gives a subtle sheen. So especially it's great for low ceilings. It actually makes that ceiling look taller because of the reflective nature to it.
So we've been talking about interior colors and they set a mood, but honestly, for curb appeal and when someone comes into a home, how do you think about exterior colors? And here in LA, you've just moved into this home. What did you think about? You've got the front exterior, the garden. So talk a little bit about how you use paint there.
Well, it's interesting because I think that when it comes to the exterior and the selection of a paint color, I really do believe you've got to look at what the architectural style of that structure is. And there are certain colors that are appropriate, more appropriate than others for houses. So if you've got a Mediterranean house, it probably should be a white or a pink or a cream, whatever, because that's what the architectural style mandates. A Georgian colonial like this, there's a set number of colors that are appropriate for that. This house actually used to be pale yellow with white trim, and now it's white with black trim. So I think that to me, it's about being appropriate for that house. I think that's important as the exterior, because you don't get to fill it with furniture and styles. So people are really rating it and grading it based on the appropriateness of that house in that context of the color. But you also have to think about the neighboring houses and what are those colors, because you don't want to be the purple house on a street of white houses. You really do need to make sure that your house, even it can make a statement, but you don't want it to be a statement that is too bold or too dramatic. You want to feel like you are a part of the setting that the house is in.
Yes, and there's a community sense about
Absolutely.
it. It doesn't stick out
Absolutely.
like a sore thumb.
Exactly. And here we are in the backyard, and it's not a big backyard, but we find that we use every bit of it.
Oh, beautiful. It's like a slice of paradise in Hancock Park here.
Thank you.
I like the trellis along the wall, too.
It's a fun little touch, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's been so nice to be with you, Timothy. Thank you.
I love being with you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
Hi, I'm Pam Jaccarino, Editor-in-Chief of Luxe Interiors Design. Welcome to DesignTV. Today I'm here in the office of Charlotte Moss, who is an amazing decorator, author. She also has a flair for living and for giving back. Charlotte, it's so nice to be here in your office.
In the flesh.
In the flesh. We've done a few of these together, mostly through a screen.
I know, we did. I think we did too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so thank you so much.
Delighted. Thank you.
And gosh, you've got your 12th book that is just been released. And this is something that is a little bit different. You were inspired by Edith Wharton, who, gosh, in 1916, she edited the Book of the Homeless as a fundraiser.
Right.
And she reached out to artists and poets and designers to contribute original stories. And you got a spark from her during COVID.
Totally.
And it's interesting because she had said that not only was it a pleasure for her to do this, but it was a call for duty. And you felt the same. Talk a little bit about, before we get into the book, how the call to duty came to you.
You know, I've owned the original book, The Book of the Homeless, for a long time because I have a Edith Wharton library. It's been a book that I always thought was a great model for a fundraiser. It made so much sense because Edith went to everyone that she knew that she could, Henry James, Rupert Brooke, I mean, everybody, Cocteau. And she went to all them to ask them what they did best. And I thought that just made so much sense because she wasn't asking for money. She wasn't putting her hand out, but creating something that could raise money. Teddy Roosevelt, wrote that forward.
Absolutely.
And anyway, that book has been, I always say it's been vibrating on my bookshelf for years. And then I think I had a moment watching the news after we'd all been locked down for a while, and the rapidity with which people were losing jobs.
Yeah.
And unable to feed their families, and seeing food lines really got to me. And then I just said, oh my God, I have to do this book. I have to do Edith's book and do it a little bit differently.
For the world today.
Yeah, for the world today. And so we actually had done 2 challenges on Instagram to raise money for Feeding America and No Kid Hungry. And after raising about $150,000, I said, well, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We can raise so much more. And so we decided it would be No Kid Hungry. And I put together a sort of my posse of great friends who created their list. We went out to their list. We went out to my list. We prioritized names. They all thought it was a great idea. They came on board, and I'm forever in their debt for doing it with such enthusiasm. And then before we knew it, we had 120 contributors.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So the book is Home, a Celebration. So you have this spark. It's the early days of COVID. You're inspired by Edith Wharton, and talk a little bit about how it came together. I know you talked about lists and all that, but this is something that is a massive undertaking,
a military maneuver. Just ask Kimberly, because she had spreadsheets.
Your assistant, yeah.
We had spreadsheets of contributors. Then it was, when did the letter go out? Then when did they follow up with us, yes or no? And then how do we follow up with them? Then we had to give everybody a deadline. Then it has to come in for the deadline. Then there had to be copyright letters signed. There were so many moving parts. Kimberly ran that. Could not have done this book without her.
And when did the spark hit? And then the book is out October 6th. So
I think we started working in May.
Okay.
I mean, I literally sat down one night at dinner with my husband. I remember just sitting on the porch, and we were having dinner, and I said, I have to do this. He said, I know you do. I said, it's a big gulp. He says, you have to do this. And I said, you're with me? He says, all the way. So that was important to me, to have my husband's support, because it meant that I was going to be distracted. Plus, I was trying to finish Flowers, my book. I was writing that. And so Kimberly is running all these spreadsheets and following up with everyone. And that's how it all came together.
It was a big community that contributed.
Yeah, and
for the cause.
With such enthusiasm and soul, a lot of soul in this book.
So talk a little bit about how you put this list together. It's sort of like organizing a massive dinner party.
Yeah.
How did you pick?
That'd been a big dinner party at 120. Yeah.
That also would have been maybe 6 months to plan that. But
yes.
Talk about some of the notable voices that are in the book, and how you organized, prioritizing who to reach out to.
Oh my gosh. Well, it all started with everyone's list on this committee. And we made everyone prioritize their list. And of course, we knew that some people would be more difficult to get in touch with, and it would take us more time. And so, you have these rolling lists. And every time there was a yes, we added it to, we let everybody know. And, it was like running the lottery or something. And we wanted to make sure that it had great diversity on so many levels. And so there are chefs that gave us recipes. There are writers that gave us unbelievable essays, poems, photographers that did things, artists that did watercolors and drawings of interiors. I mean, it's pretty broad. I think it's a great read about home. It sort of reinforces a lot of things we all think, and then makes us think about it also in a different way.
And was there, I'm also struck that it's so interesting. So it's your 12th book.
But I didn't write this one. Now.
Well,
I edited this.
But how was that process for you? Because as an author of a book
and a control freak and a control freak over your own book.
Absolutely. You you're in charge of everything. You have the vision. You know how did it feel to be more of an editor, right? And did you enjoy that more, or was it a little scarier because you have to relinquish control?
Yeah, it was a little scary because I was always worried about the deadline. They're both very different. It's like decorating for yourself and decorating for other people. I mean, it's right hand, the left hand. It's all the same. And like I said, Kimberly kept it organized, so that I could focus on the substance.
Tell us, Charlotte, about some of the notable people who are part of the book, if you will.
There's so many names.
I know you can't list them all, but just give us a little taste.
But Julian Fellows wrote about Christmas. Gloria Steinem did something very poignant. John Meacham wrote this essay about a book that he read by Robert Penn Warren in his grandfather's house. Childhood memories. Bette Midler wrote about Restoration Project because what she did with that project was really to enhance the lives of people in various communities. So there were just so many names in this book. Annie Leibovitz. We have photograph given to us by Irving Penn Foundation. Wendy Goodman wrote a great piece about photographs that Richard Avedon gave to her that he did of a 1950s apartment when he was just thought Wendy should have them. And she wrote about that. So other contributors were like Debbie Shore, who actually started Share Your Strength in 1984. And Darren Walker, head of the Ford Foundation, wrote the foreword to the book. So very grateful to both of them for what they wrote.
What was it like for you as, these images came in, these works of art came in, these essays came in, that, it's so interesting to me that these were all contributed at a time where we were in lockdown. So the meaning of home has never meant more during this time of the pandemic.
No, I think it was right here for all of us.
Yeah.
It was if there was a blessing, this was the moment that we all had to come face to face with it. And so hearing all of these definitions, whether it was, people, home is an idea, home is a husband, home is this repository of memories and things. And the list goes on in terms of the diversity. And that's what I love about it. I think it'll be a great go to bed, read a few every night kind of book.
Like a great book of short stories.
Because some of them are dense. Joyce Carol Oates wrote 4 pages of house and home, which is amazing and needs its time to be read, thoughtfully. So I think people will really enjoy it.
And it's also, I think that what I'm also struck by is that this book is a definition of a moment in time. So it will be so interesting to read it now, and even in 10 years, in a decade, to look back, because there's so much. There's people's souls that are in the book.
Yes.
There's artwork and creation in the book, and it marks a period of time in which we've all.
And it was made
lived.
for the book. So the majority, 98%, probably all original works for the book, and that I think will mark in time as well.
Absolutely.
Because we're all sort of like affected by this zeitgeist, and this zeitgeist was the thing that drove everyone to create something unique. So I hope that people will think about it the way they thought about Edith's book. But most importantly, and the thing that I've always said about philanthropy and raising money, because I've done my fair share for all sorts of causes, is that this book gave everyone a chance to give, and then people buying the book are now giving. So there's this big circle of giving going on, and there are no big asks in here.
So all the royalties from the sale of the book are going to go to benefit No Kid Hungry, yes?
This was the reason we did this with No Kid Hungry, is because their sole focus is the eradication of childhood poverty and hunger.
Yep.
And while this is something that's a little more systemic than just not eating and not having food, it's about the inequality at a lot of different levels. And so there's something about that it's rooted in inequality. But this is their sole focus.
Yeah.
And they work with local schools, local food banks, and it came out of Share Your Strength, which is the base organization that No Kid Hungry is an initiative of theirs, and was I think 2010 is when No Kid Hungry was started. But the fact that Share Your Strength is the organization that No Kid Hungry operates under, this is what the whole book is about. Mm-hmm. Sharing your strength, sharing what you can.
Yeah.
And so that cycle sort of comes around.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that, all of these contributors were at home, thinking about home. They got the ask from you. What is a memory? What is a piece of artwork? As we have, and as you've gone through the last year and a half, and we all have, I'm so interested to know how this whole process of putting the book together has sort of impacted you, and how you have, looked at home in a different way.
I think it makes you step back big giant step back to really think about what it is. What is it? We are so focused on an everyday basis to find things, put things together, design things, create things, that you have to come back to the soul of this whole project, and that's the home. Yeah, I think that it really made us all really dig deep.
Mm-hmm.
And, like Nate Berkus said in his essay that accompanied his photograph, that our home is about our future. And I think that really struck me as well, because we were so stuck in the present with what was going on,
Yeah,
that we needed that hope
absolutely.
and that thinking about the future. And several other people, express home as the future as well. So there are some commonalities and threads within the book that are very interesting, that sort of cross borders in terms of disciplines.
Yeah.
So I think that home as future was the big positive thing that sort of struck me.
In the end, we all have to be optimistic, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte. It's been great. I can't wait to get my copy and go through and be in my home. I'll probably, be in an easy chair and curl up with my doggies and just go through and read everyone's perspective. I think it's going to be so incredibly interesting to look through this and really have it as a keepsake.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Pam, and thank you for, all your support throughout
Of course.
this.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Developing Communities for Better Health Access with HDR. Today, we are very pleased to be hosted by HDR in New York, who will be discussing the direction and dynamics of new health and mobility paradigm in the planning and development of our cities. Hosting an event like this requires the support of great firms like HDR and our incredible sponsors. We'd like to thank ARCOM, Woven by Imagination, Ardent Studio, high-performance glass solutions that inspire great ideas, engage collective thinking, and elevate every space. Growy, designing and engineering innovative water products for bathroom solutions and kitchen fittings. LX Houses, creating human-friendly, eco-conscious spaces by offering innovative premium quality surfacing and flooring solutions. And Versteel, a solutions provider of American-made furnishings for working and learning environments. And now I would like to introduce today's moderator, Metropolis's editor-in-chief, Avi Rajagopal. Avi?
Thank you so much, Tina. And thanks everyone for joining us today. There's no better time to talk about access to health than during one of the worst health crises of recent memory. One of the things that the pandemic has really put into focus is just how critical the equitable or equal distribution of access to health is. It has been a key indicator in how communities have fared during these past several months. However, access to health has not always been a central concern of how we design communities, whether they be urban communities, rural communities, or those in between. It has not necessarily been the framework within which we think about how our built environment is shaped. But hopefully that is set to change. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today with our amazing group of panelists. We have with us today Randy Howard, who is the SVP of Corporate Facility Services at Northwell Health, which is New York State's largest healthcare provider and private employer. In his role, Randy oversees the design and construction of all capital improvements for Northwell's 10 million square foot physical plant. Randy also oversees all finance and operating activities associated with the health system's nearly 7 million square foot off-campus portfolio. Randy, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Avi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Also with us is Peter Jungkunst, who is Assistant Vice President Facilities for Emblem Health, a health and wellness company that provides insurance plans, primary and specialty healthcare, and wellness solutions. It is one of the nation's largest not-for-profit health insurers, and it serves more than 3 million people in the New York tri-state area. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here with the panelists and everyone else.
Also on the panel today is Fabio Tiers, who's founder and CEO of Ponto Care Incorporated. Ponto Care prevents the evolution of chronic disease complications by utilizing a smart mobile exam infrastructure that recreates and staffs the exam room wherever the patient chooses to be, using the same protocols, equipment, and staff employed in clinics, while ensuring that the experience is seamless, safe, and cost-efficient. Fabio, it's such a pleasure to have you.
Really a pleasure to be part of this panel.
Also with us is Farzana Gandhi, founder of Farzana Gandhi Design Studio and Associate Professor of Architecture at New York Institute of Technology. This year, Farzana also co-founded the Collective Infrastructures, a multidisciplinary design lab confronting complex societal challenges with a unique comprehensive response. Her current projects include grant-based humanitarian work and pro bono efforts. Farzana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you to HDR and Metropolis for the invitation and to join such esteemed speakers in this conversation. Thank you.
And of course, our hosts for today, we have Daniel Cusick, who is the health principal at HDR, with over 30 years of achievement and progression in leadership, design, and execution roles. Dan has a long history working for various healthcare systems in New York, specifically on Long Island. Daniel, such a pleasure to have your wide perspective on this topic.
Thank you, Avi. It's very grateful for everybody to be here and for letting HDR host this. So thank you.
Randy, I'm going to start with you. Northwell, has this large network, and you serve so many diverse populations across New York State. And your patients come to you in so many different ways, across distances. They come by private transit, public transit, now telemedicine. Can you talk a little bit about how you ensure or work towards a consistent patient experience across all of those modalities?
Absolutely, Avi, and it's a real critical component of everything we do. And starting from the very beginning, we really infuse a sense of systemness through the entire enterprise. While every site is unique and has their own set of diversity, we still all carry the systemness of Northwell Health and the values that we espouse through Northwell Health as well. And when I say the very beginnings, ironically, we have our orientation program is called Beginnings. And at Beginnings, the first speaker is our president and CEO, Michael Dowling. He makes it to each and every Monday. Every Monday we have this Beginnings to really personally see every new employee and share with them his philosophy as an immigrant from Ireland and the hardships that he endured both in Ireland and when he came over to the United States, and how healthcare has been a major force shaping who he is today. So we're able to really start at the beginning with Michael Dowling infusing that systemness and sharing our values. And then as the teams go out and work in their locations, they're guided by a set of lengthy but very understandable principles, right? So we apply a consistent standard of care by specialty in everything we do, which is all really founded in evidence-based research. So whatever the evidence-based research data supports as a best practice in healthcare, all of our hospitals, all of our hundreds of ambulatory sites all adhere to that, and also go through very open and very upfront peer reviews, ongoing focused professional provider reviews or focused professional provider reviews to ensure that we are adhering to and exceeding healthcare standards throughout. And again, that would apply to both coming in a traditional model, whether it's going to your doctor's office or a hospital. And as you mentioned, Avi, telemedicine as well, because COVID has really accelerated the acceptance of telemedicine, but we still have to follow best practices, evidence-based practices as well, to make sure our patients have that same type of care. And that really gets into the specifics of the clinical acumen that for the folks that are part of Northwell, and very well trained, very, very well educated people. But getting back to a little bit more of the values, all of us are infused with patient and family-centered training and focus, right? Everything revolves around the patient. It's not the old model from a few decades ago where everything revolved around the physician. We all put the patient and his or her family, right, an important member of the healthcare team, up on that pedestal and ask, how are we doing and what else can we do? And really listening to what their needs and concerns are, and more importantly, their fears, right? Because even as good as we think we are, no one wakes up in the morning wanting to come into a hospital or wanting to go see a physician, right? They'd rather do something much more entertaining than that. So we really provide a lot of focus on that patient and family centered care, and really monitor our patient experience and family experience scores as well to help improve ourselves. Every day there's an opportunity for improvement for how we applied our clinical prowess, as well as our interactions with the patient and family nucleus as well. And we also evaluate ourselves through Medicare and Medicaid's value-based purchasing, right? How well are we meeting all of those metrics, whether it be morbidity, mortality, use of imaging, efficiencies, how pleased overall people were with the services they received. So, and we don't use it as one data point. We use them as several data points in our ongoing search for excellence, right? We always strive for excellence by continuing to have a focused PDCA approach, plan, do, check, act, and continue to improve those processes all the way around. So we put all those in together to really develop a standard approach, so people are receiving same types of care throughout the enterprise. And from a physical plant perspective, we also employ standards of design so that our hospitals and our ambulatory sites have some similarities. They don't look identical, but our logo is prominent everywhere. Different design patterns are very prominent as well, so that you get the sense of, yes, this is a Northwell site, and here's what I experienced last time, and so I expect to experience that same great type of care as well. So we wrap those all up together to help provide world-class care throughout the enterprise.
Thank you so much for that, Andy. I mean, I think there's so much to unpack in what you said, but for the architects and designers who are listening in today, I think there's just a few things that I'd love to emphasize. I mean, I think first of all, that point of contact, right, with somebody who's come in for care, or who's accessing care through telemedicine or in other forms. And so, that experience is sort of at the nucleus of everything that you're talking about, right? That's right at the core of that. But supporting that is this beautiful thing that you brought up called systemness, right? Just this understanding that, when you come in for care within a healthcare system, do you have a sense of, from a patient's point of view, do you have a sense of sort of how the system works for you, right? And I think that sometimes can be really complicated. So healthcare spaces that articulate that are just so successful, right? And then, of course, you brought up the various ways in which you maintain, the quality of care, the consistency of the patient experience, whether it's through your own internal practices, through the data metrics that you track, as well as your standards of design. And I think, that's really important, because that's what then contributes to that systemness and then makes that individual point of contact good, valuable
Absolutely.
and a pleasant experience. So
It
thank you
really
so
does.
much for that, Randy.
Oh,
Go
you
ahead.
bet. And I just want to add to that when you mentioned the standards of design, because right, it's really, people evaluate us on the aesthetics, right? You think of quality when you see a clean, pleasing appearance. People have determined their quality level of your site before they see the first provider. So you know, everything about the parking and the physical plan really contribute to that decision before they see a doctor or a nurse.
Right. Absolutely. And you know, I wonder what how those standards of design will develop in in virtual situations and telemedicine situations. Would be a Fabio to talk to us about that in a few minutes. Just to our audience, everyone, we are taking questions at any point during today's discussion. So if you hear something that sparks an idea in your head, don't let it escape into the ether. Put it down into Q&A and allow us to address it. We're here to talk to you today. Peter, I want to bring you in next. Can you talk a little bit about Emblem's neighborhood care program? So, you know, Randy talked to us about the healthcare system itself. And now, you know, to zoom a little out of that and talk about the connections between that system and the community. And I think the neighborhood care, you know, really does improve access and, you know, influences how people use the healthcare that is available to them. So do you want to talk about that, Peter?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we really think the neighborhood care spaces are special, right? They're co-located within our medical offices. There are 14 of them. And I think, you know, if I understand, you know, Randy talked a little bit about the company culture and also about the built environment. And, you know, we like to think that we're providing, you know, competent, culturally oriented care. And that's what those care offices do. And they're sort of even specific to the neighborhood they're in. So if you're at the one in Harlem, you know, you're going to find people that live and work in Harlem working there. And if you go to the one in Chinatown, you'll find, you know, it also has, you know, people who speak those languages, right? And it's a place that you can walk in, you know, unlike maybe seeing a doctor, you don't need an appointment. You're made to feel welcome. And, you know, they can actually connect you, you know, to an appointment to your doctor. They also can speak to you about other benefits that are available within your community, other programs. It's also open to members and non-members. So if you think about that, you know, it's not just the 3 million plus members that we think our door is open to, but it's open to everybody. And you can come in, you can sit down, you can have a refreshment. And I think, you know, there's a sense of, you know, inclusiveness to having something like that co-located right next to the medical office space. And we started, I think, with 3 of them, and now we're up to 14. And it's part of our, you know, our programming. For those of you that are coming from the design and architecture background, you know, you would maybe question, like, why are we having a few thousand square feet of space for that kind of activity right based within your medical office space? So we're really proud about that, and we think it's something that we're going to, you know, continue to build on that.
You know, I love that. I mean, I think it's such an interesting program to help weave in your services sort of into particular communities and kind of create those, you know, sort of much stronger, almost fingers into the community, open up the doors a little bit more. And I think that's interesting, you know, with you know, a large healthcare system at its core, what are those interfaces, you know, with the community, and what do those points of interface look like? Thank you so much for that, Peter. Fabio, I'd love to talk to you about a different modality of interfacing with people, which is what PontoCare is working on. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how it improves access, but also what some of the challenges you face in terms of folks being able to adopt, a telemedicine or a digital or virtual sort of care situation.
Thanks, Avi. So the key value proposition for PontoCare is to improve access, which is core to the conversation today. And we are small. We're not, the other side of the spectrum from Northwell and Emblem, but our vision, our mission is to focus on helping patients specifically that have a chronic condition that have to go to the doctor very often to monitor their chronic condition, being a chronic kidney disease, chronic heart failure, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, those diseases that need care frequently. Every 2 months, every 3 months, the patient has to go to the clinic. Of course, that gets old. That gets old for the patient, gets old for the caregiver, and lo and behold, the patients stop going or are not compliant, and the disease complicates, and then it's very bad for the patient, but it's also very bad for the system and the healthcare costs. So we are very focused on improving that by doing the following. For these patients that are going to the doctors often, we do the pieces that need to be done physically at the patient's home. For example, oftentimes there's a need for ultrasound, there's a need for blood draw, something that, or like eye exam. Those things, to the extent that it's possible to do, to bring the equipment and to be the diagnostics and using technology to make this compliant and fully comparable to the clinic. We do that in the patient's home, collect the data, and enable this doctor to do a full consultation without cutting corners. That would be through telemedicine. So in other words, if you look at it from the other way around, we are expanding the scope of virtual care, we're expanding the scope of telemedicine consultations. And by doing that, we are making it much easier for these patients to stay compliant with the regimen of medical evaluations, and to stay compliant with the relationship with the doctor. So one thing that's key about PontoCare is that we are not a new company that's doing telemedicine. We're always supporting telemedicine, existing organization like Northwell and Emblem, any of these organizations that have a need to serve the patients. We are there to do the exams, pretty much like, and we are limited to that. So that's something that's core. So in terms of the challenges, we are facing the challenge, of course, for being new. There's a big aspect about reimbursement. I'm not going to get too much into that, but it's a new structure, and we need to work the things out with the health plans, and that's really being not really much of a technology challenge, but really a structural and legacy, dealing with legacy system challenge. And I think it is something that can be worked out, especially in this context, again, not only of management of patients with chronic diseases, but in the context specifically of value-based care. Because if there's an incentive that's intrinsic to the payment system that entails improvement of key metrics like reduction of hospitalization, improvement of patient outcomes or mortality, morbidity, I think this is the kind of thing that a better access through a system like PontoCare in conjunction with the existing health provider, it makes sense. Let me stop here.
I think what's so interesting about what you're talking about is is kind of layering, is really strengthening telemedicine as an option for many communities, right? And as you said, it comes with so many challenges. But it just adds another kind of, I think, dimension to how distributed healthcare is becoming, right? And or needs to become. and some of the challenges that are still there in providing that kind of distributed care to people, regardless of where they might be or what their access to technology and other things might be. But, ultimately, I think the goal is, we have to work around those systems to make sure that, that people have the access to care that they need, that, that they don't fall non-compliant, and then that it doesn't, start to affect their health. Farzana, can we turn this around for a second? We've been talking mainly from the point of view of the goals of a health organization, in terms of keeping people healthy or reaching people or ensuring a good experience and so on. What if we were to turn that around and talk about health from a community's point of view? What do communities care about in the way their cities or towns or neighborhoods are designed, and the way that healthcare facilities are integrated into, where they live and what they have access to? So can you talk a little bit about that from an urban or community point of view?
Yeah, sure, Avi. Thanks for the question. So maybe, to give a little bit of context, my practice and research really is committed to open, collaborative, inclusive design processes. And so, while the work spans in scale from urban scale to building to placemaker to product, really, there's a commitment to a level of outreach that's consistent in all of the work. And so I find myself really working hand in hand with climate and socially disadvantaged communities all around the world, in Africa and India and Puerto Rico, but also right here in our backyard in New York, in Bushwick, the South Bronx, Bed-Stuy, Inwood. And, in kind of having these conversations, these messy conversations that occur in schools and in churches and public gardens, where you really try to listen to the community and you invite them to share their voice and their concerns. And, you kind of have them document observations through messy exercises. What really comes out over and over again is that health is a huge part of quality of life and a lot of the concerns that communities face. And I would say that from a community's point of view, the question of healthcare access is probably threefold. There are three components. One being physical access, the second being the quality of access, and the third, more sort of non-physical barriers to that access. And I think Peter and Fabio started to touch on some of those things. But in terms of physical access, it's yes, it's the ability to hop on a subway or a bus or public transit and have that available to you within 5 or 10 minutes of walking from your residence. And have that go to a station or a stop where there is a medical facility of some stature, right? As Fabio's pointing out, that's changing, right? Now we have also telemedicine and mobile systems, right? In Puerto Rico, where that's not possible, where you don't have, sort of transit systems and physical access, right? I'm working on sort of decentralized infrastructure systems, right? That start to micro infrastructuralize, if that's a word, the systems of healthcare and energy and water and so on. But I think the idea of the new sort of 5-minute walking city is current. It's being talked about in Europe post-pandemic, right? The idea to have all of the resources and facilities that you need to have quality of life within 5 minutes of walking is something that, I think is talked about quite a bit as we start to rethink our streets, our urban spaces, and they may actually also be sort of solutions to delayed response times from EMS workers, right? Like there are communities where you call 911 and, the EMS does not arrive as quickly as in other communities due to traffic or longer distance or less availability, and so on. When it comes to quality of access, it's sort of a given that higher quality medical providers, typically live in and work in higher income neighborhoods, right? I think Peter's idea of sort of this neighborhood care system is a start to address that, where you do bring providers to the communities themselves, right? I think location proximity, I think, a lot of facilities have closed and budget cuts have happened due to economic crises and even now with the pandemic. There are facilities that just don't compare in the quality, right? There are less ICU beds available, less specialists available, and there's a lot of technology and data out there, right? And there's data that tells us all of these things. Mainly it's statistical data. Oftentimes it's not qualitative data that we collect from the community. I'm working at the moment also on a new digital interface that starts to bridge that gap, right? To kind of bring, find ways that community can participate in data collection in a sufficient way that it can sort of offer, specialists and the professionals in the room ideas about where those gaps are in all of New York City, right? I think there's a lot of ways that we can leverage new technologies and so on. And then on the non-physical barriers to that access, right? We often don't talk about the fact that although resources may be available, there's a lot of lack of awareness. There's lack of trust, right? There's also fear of discrimination, fear of stigmas associated with certain health conditions. Of course, Peter mentioned language barriers, sort of paperwork barriers of getting into the system, right? And I think there's a lot of much needed outreach and on the ground field work and partnerships with local community groups, right? Trusted sort of mutual aid groups, trusted advocacy nonprofits and churches that people know and have large constituent populations that are following those groups. And those partnerships can really start to bridge the education gap, right? And the ability to, or cultural gap for that matter, and the ability for sort of formal healthcare systems to become part of the everyday in neighborhoods where predominantly non-formal systems exist, right? And not to disengage with the non-formal systems, right? And there's a lot of holistic practices and wellness and health and wellness ideas, meditation, yoga, so on, that's sort of surfaced in the last couple of years, right? And there's really a disconnect, I think, between formal healthcare and informal healthcare. And how can we start to tailor our care per neighborhood and sort of the cultural differences that may exist or the real kind of challenges, the health challenges that a certain community might be facing is something I think that's worth thinking about. So.
Thank you so much for that. I think that was a great, you structured that, the sort of the three ways that we can think about access. And I think that's really important. And, as you were talking, I think it's been incredible if we think about our experience of the last year and a half, how all three failures in access have played into sort of the health situation that we find ourselves in. And of course, the one that seems to be most intractable now is, of course, cultural positions and awareness around healthcare issues, especially when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, I think start radiating out from there, just the various barriers to access that we need to address. And I especially, want to emphasize your last point, thinking about healthcare systems or health systems or even health in a holistic way, and thinking about sort of almost every tool in the toolbox, right? Everything that will help. And certainly in certain communities in New York City, the city has taken that approach, through various programs. But there are so many determinants to health, and then health in turn determines so many other sort of factors for communities in terms of education or wealth generation and all of those things. So, we are only now waking to the fact that this question of access to health is such a central question as we look at patterns of development, whether it's commercial or residential development, as we look at patterns of how communities are being designed. So I want to bring Daniel in on that, because I think that's the that's the thing here, in terms of when you think about designing communities around this notion of healthy living, at various income points. I mean, I think certainly at the high end, with certain communities, as Farzana pointed out, it's kind of understood that health is such a key part of the urban design equation. And in some others, it doesn't tend to be top of mind in the conversation. But as we think about health-oriented developments and communities that are designed around health, how do we partner on that? Who should designers be working with? Who are all the folks? And Farzana mentioned some, Fabio mentioned some, and we have some models from Randy and Peter too. But if you could talk to us about sort of the availability of different partners and expertise in kind of bringing those design projects to life, that would be great.
So thanks, Avi. Appreciate the question. Very detailed, deep deck on the answers. But, before I get there, I think I want to start is at some time in history, architects have been given this kind of baton of being these guardians of building, the foundations in society and like all these composites, and architects took it on. They were just building a building to now, we curb societies and so forth. So for HDR and like myself, the way we look, investigate, and design too, we look at more of an arc story, an arc meaning to it. And what I mean by that is we look at healthcare even the same way, where it's really cradle to grave. So with that, health is a given thing to every single one of us right at birth, right? So nobody should have less of. Unfortunately, the world has been curved and molded different ways. So again, going back to the architect being this person who has this mic in their hand to talk about it and curb, we at HDR do a little bit of this aspect where we preview, review, and endorse. And what that basically means is we gather a lot of information. We go out to a lot of parties, regardless of size of projects, right? We're very lucky to have projects that are components to relationships with healthcare systems and so forth. But then we have large projects. To that point, we go back and take a step back and see where we can use those developments to the better good of education. A lot of it's been spoken already, but it's education, whether it's even from the higher ed or even to the point of individuals on like the panel here and so forth, writing white papers and still educating public. It's health systems writing out informative papers and so forth. It is to urban renewal on community boards as well as developers. It is with developers is a large aspect, because in America you can just buy property and basically in certain zoning do what you would like and so on. But if we can get with developers to work in conjunction with health systems that have a reflection to the community's needs, that us as architects and designers, we now use data. I love the comment about stagnant to qualitative. HDR is now actually using an amazing amount of qualitative because it is there, the data, and we use computational analytics to put that together to help make smarter decisions and then govern. Well, I can't say govern because architects, we don't actually pay for these developments, but we can help guide the power brokers who are politicians, again, commissioners of urban renewal, city planners, administrators, and facility directors at health systems to make these thoughts and decisions about what's best happening in real time in their societies. Neighborhoods build communities, right? So we are now to the point of being able to pinpoint within zip codes and so forth, through data, some of the reflections of what's happening in real health in those communities. And unfortunately, incomes and so forth reflect to that. And then we do the best advisement possible to clients and health systems to bring that across. We are finding a lot of health systems are starting to conglomerate and bring themselves and purchase together, which is even a better mission statement that we can actually work with across the country and actually for us internationally. It is, it's a joy working in this field. One, I do it for myself. We do all talk about health as if it was something for somebody else. Unfortunately, this is a one-way street for everybody. So we tend to stop and design for ourselves. Who and how would we be in these environments and or neighborhoods and communities, and then pull ourselves a little bit back for our families and so forth. So with that, we actually want to explore the communication much further. And, you know, we talk about accessibility. If you say to a technical architect, you're talking about the curb on the New York City, right? To get up on Americans with Disabilities Act. We can take it that granular. But I think we as a nation right now should be looking at accessibility, especially this trigger moment that happened in history, this pandemic, where are we actually able to reach every single individual with a common care, whether it is on telemedicine, whether it's communication, whether it's on the experience or the brand you trust. If it is urban renewal, which helps with like the mayors and the city planners to get to facilities better and make better decisions. That is where we are looking, and we actually have been doing, as well as intertwining it with networks on transportation of rail, highway, and then secondary roads. And the worst part is actually parking. And we say it because if you don't have the right parking, people, they go to the next shop, and it's absolutely brutal. So we're A through Z in our developments and thinking and our conversations with all the players to be. And the one voice that is not spoken enough is actually the person we're caring for, the person at home, and they don't have a voice. And we've got to find out a way to get access to their voice, to what they really need the most. And unfortunately, we are looking at, again, data from the outside in a qualitative way to kind of help fill that gap. So it's an organic model. There's nothing perfect about it, yet we are trying at exponential speed. Pandemic taught us one great thing: this stuff changes immediately, and what can we do to react? Because at the end of the day, every single person on this has family or even themselves who wants good health. And it should be nothing more than something we are actually able to get. So a little bit of a long-winded answer there. So I don't know if that helps, but that's where we're engrossed.
You know, health is really everything, and health is everywhere. I think, Daniel, that's kind of what you've emphasized for us here, because when you think about it, like you brought it right back out to the larger mission for architects and interior designers in general, right? Well, how do we shape the design environment to improve people's lives? You know, and within that, I mean, health is such a critical and key component, you know, and so designing for health goes well beyond designing healthcare spaces or healthcare facilities or even healthcare systems, right? And so how do we start to kind of take on that task, as you said, which is huge. You also spoke about the inputs that we need in order to carry out the design task, you know, and how those inputs are changing, and also the voices that maybe that we haven't been paying attention to that much. And I think that's a key challenge that I'd love to kind of talk to all our panelists about as well, is, you know, how do we gather information? How do we kind of bring those perspectives in? I have a question for our panelists here, but before I jump into our next idea, a quick thank you to everyone on the panel for talking to us today. A quick thank you to HDR for hosting today's discussion, and a thank you to Arcom, Arden Studio, Crowe, LX Houses, and Versteel for making today's discussion possible. And to everyone who's listening, thank you for joining us today. A quick reminder that, you know, we are taking questions for this panel. So if you want to put any thoughts, comments, questions, suggestions, anything at all into the Q&A, we'd love to see those. There's a couple of questions in here already that we're going to take in a few minutes. a special reminder to the interior designers in our audience today, whether you work on healthcare spaces or not. Just this week, Metropolis was part of the launch of an interior design pledge for positive impact, which pledges interior designers to recognize the influence that they can have on climate, health, and equity, and suggests a common framework, the first we've had really for sustainable interiors and resilient interiors, a pledge that's been framed by all three professional associations in North America and by Metropolis. So I do hope you will read the pledge and consider signing it and committing to making an impact on people's health as well as on the climate and on equity. So with that small segue into a question for all our panelists, and I'm going to let Daniel off the hook on this one for just a minute. But Fabio, Peter, Randy, and Prasanna, can you talk a little bit more about how you currently do or hope to use designers or design methodologies in the work that you're doing? What are you looking at design to help solve within this larger question of access to healthcare? I know it's a really big question, but it would be great, since our audience is mainly a design-oriented audience, for them to hear, what are some of the challenges that are out there for them?
Who wants to go first?
I can start quickly. I'm here at New Lab. New Lab is a place where there's a focus on industrial design and innovation. And I came here exactly for that reason, because I needed to work with designers, experienced designers, and industrial designers to build the equipment, the mobile systems that can enable us to get into the house of the patient and out quickly, while doing everything using the same equivalent system that are there in a regular clinic. So it involves system thinking, and involves kind of the mechanics of that are similar to what you have in a regular clinic, meaning that we have to optimize for time. At the end of the day, we have X many hours in the day, and we need to utilize those assets as frequently as possible. Meanwhile, we have to give the patients a wonderful experience. And so it is everything has to be designed to the T. I mean, the words that are said, how it's explained, how it's set up, how it's wrapped up, everything has to be so thought out, because every minute counts.
So I would say that it's really important to us. I'm coming from a design and construction background, a facilities background, a real estate background. There's always a lot of transactions. You meet with so many different people, right? So you meet with, administrators, operations people, clinical managers, doctors. I like going to our offices, and sometimes just even sitting around with patients coming in and talking to them a little bit, right? And then I think about the role of interior designers, and it could be, again, kind of traditional, right? We engaged a large healthcare design firm to give us a guidelines, and it's over 200 pages. So, it has furniture, it has finishes, it has lighting, it has all those things that we think of as interior designers, that we need them for. And but then I think about what I like about interior designers is sometimes when somebody stops thinking about all those little pieces and they walk into our offices and they actually, they're kind of struck. They're like, well, there's a really nice ceiling height here. There's a lot, I can see out a window. The light is very nice. Oh, look, the height of that chair is actually comfortable for me to sit in and get out of. We even have sort of changed our artwork. Prasanna talked about partnerships, right? So we found a partner is a woman who was finding artists and communities with challenges of their own. It could be disabilities, homelessness, and so on. And so we actually, when you walk in now, you see artwork and murals on our walls, right? So those are the kinds of things. Ultimately, it's almost like a feeling that you would get from the role of the designer. It's like a feeling you get when you walk into the place. And it should be a good feeling and a health feeling. And I've been thinking a lot lately about, I think what they call like the hierarchy of needs. All right. And the first one is kind of the physical things we're talking about: shelter, place. Right. The next one, up from that is kind of safety and security, which includes healthcare, and it goes on to having a job, to being able to be belonging and feeling included in your community. And then I think the top of it is self-actualization, right? And to think that, from lower down, maybe in that hierarchy at the start, that's where interior designers are often engaged with us.
And, some of the activities we've been involved with specifically for access, thinking along the same lines as Fabio and Peter, and it really starts to get towards the drivers or the social determinants of health is to some degree we're trying to bring healthcare to where the need is. And Ave, you mentioned our COVID environment, right? So we dispersed into the community with pop-up tents and taking advantage of faith-based locations, since no one was going to temple or church or mosque anymore. So we would go and set up first for testing, and then when vaccinations became available, also to vaccinate people. And we're still setting up pop-up areas around the footprint of where we're at, really the greater New York metropolitan area. But we're, more constructively, or more of an infrastructure component, is looking at how do we really place then long-term clinics or just healthcare sites in the communities where they need them. And we're doing this in a very evolutionary way. It takes a little bit of time, which is, we're usually much more quick in our actions, but between having to work through real estate and related items, it takes a little bit, but we're incredibly focused on putting clinics in underserved areas so that we can overcome those social determinants of health. We're currently moving one from really an area that does need it, but to a little bit further down the road where really centrally people who are underserved, uninsured, underinsured, immigrants who are afraid of identifying themselves because they're afraid of us contacting INS, which is not part of our shtick. So we move to them to build the trust, and we go out into the community to build the trust, to really connect with them. LGBTQ clinics that we open up in Manhattan, along with HIV clinics as well, bringing it to where the need really is, and really establishing at all of our locations that we really practice diversity and inclusion, right, and health literacy, that we really try to overcome the disparity and inequities by training our teams, publishing literature, and welcoming everyone to our facilities and asking them how they prefer to be referred to, which pronoun, if any, do you want to be referred to as. So it's a lot of sort of common sense, bring it to them, and then how we welcome everyone as well to make sure that access is readily available. And we're really focused on doing all those things and getting the care to where it needs to be. We're partnering with our mass transit folks as well, especially bus lines, to make sure those bus lines can capture people that need to get to some of our sites as well, if it's still a little bit far away. We're partnering with a company called Ambulance. It ends with a Z, not an NCE, to help us with some of our non-emergency transports as well. So there's several solutions out there to help us really raise the health of everyone in our community. And we're reaching out to them from a direct health, but also, not to get too far off target, and I won't take it too much further, but from a corporate social responsibility in terms of air quality, water quality, and not just the basic, prevention measures like don't smoke, don't drink, healthy diet, but really involved with the environment overall to make sure everything they access is truly, truly healthy. So really focused on a lot of that as well.
So I think designers are uniquely trained and positioned to deal with these kind of messy, comprehensive social problems, right? Like we're trained as specialists. We can talk technical all day long, but we also have this way of kind of thinking big picture and seeing all of the sum of the parts and kind of understanding the holistic situation. And I think we need to leverage that more as a profession and kind of work more with multidisciplinary partners, as Peter and Dan were alluding to. I think we pretend to be able to save the world, but we can't do it alone. And I think in my own experience, in my own practice, the most innovative, most creative solutions have emerged, from myself and my team when we partner with other individuals that are unexpected sort of individual partnerships, right? So, and I think that in this healthcare situation, right, or the issues of healthcare access, partnering, as I said, with IT and communication infrastructure firms, right, that start to talk about big data, but then also talk about new ways that we can leverage technology, right? Even partnering with, cultural and community groups or K through 12 education experts and bringing STEM education into the community that starts to bring the idea of healthy living practices into our basic education infrastructure, right? I mean, I find myself sitting there designing curricula as part of the delivery of a project in some of my projects, right? So it's kind of crazy, but we have to kind of flex our design muscles in ways that we typically don't, right? We're used to just doing urban design, urban proposals, buildings, if it's industrial design, then products, if it's interiors, then interiors. I think that there's a lot of magic that can happen when we start to think, hey, I can think about my design skills in the design of, a K through 12 curriculum and what that might mean in relationship to social inequities and, and physical space, right? So, I think also on the urban scale, Randy was starting to talk about air quality and water quality and things like that. I think there's also a lot of potential in, sort of designers working hand in hand with healthcare system providers in partnership with developers and agencies to address perhaps a new level of preventive care, right? So we talk about preventive care as going to your annual physical, having a PCP, having access to shots and vaccinations and so on. But what about preventive care in relationship to the urban environment and the sort of social determinants of health that are actually impacting the community, right? So we all know that there are communities at risk, in terms of not only quality of life, but life expectancy, risk of obesity, asthma, mental health, chronic disease. And what's affecting the conditions, these conditions are exacerbated by the physical environmental conditions in which these folks live, right? So garbage and trash, on public sidewalks and public space, lack of public space, lack of green, causing heat island effects, right? Where, all of the architecture and design community know about, the need for affordable and healthy food options, right? Adequate housing. And so these are things that, what if there could be some magic that pairs healthcare systems in partnership with developers and planners in sort of unexpected ways to create a new level of preventive care, you know? And I think that in these sort of unexpected multidisciplinary partnerships, that's where a lot of solution building can be had. So.
I think in every case that you all have spoken to, you know, there's the level at which maybe architecture or design operates at a tangible and physical scale, but then, you know, there's this potentially much larger, and Daniel alluded to that in his opening remarks as well, there's this potentially much larger sort of role for designers and architects to play in improving access. And, you know, Peter, you called it, you know, you use the hierarchy of needs, talking about sort of emotional or cultural needs. Fabio, you spoke about sort of, you know, just, but even the sort of tangible design elements, you know, how does equipment get in and around an apartment? In it contains the questions about what apartments are like, and, you know, who are these patients? What kinds of apartments do they live in? And I'm sure, you know, your team went through all of that. You know, and Farzana, what you were talking about, you know, just in terms of really understanding those sort of that deeper power that we have as designers to address those bigger questions. You know, that's kind of where some of the magic lies for design. And, you know, to that last point, you know, especially around some of those social determinants of health, we're understanding more and more how some of the progress that the design community has made around the green building movement has translated into a healthy building movement. And there's so much sort of talk around that. You know, I'm reminded of Enterprise Green Communities, if anybody is familiar with that, and the work they've done in certifying affordable housing, but really using health as a major kind of framework for certifying developments as being sustainable, right? And so there's a way in which that there's an aspect of resilience here that's built into how we think about design as well. I have one or two questions here from our audience. I'll take those real quick. Anosha Zanjani says, have your systems thought about using telehealth kiosks to provide access, typically for people who don't have access to appropriate broadband to even access telehealth? You know, so I'll let one of you respond to the specific question about, you know, bringing telehealth to people who might not have broadband access. So even when we assume, you know, telemedicine is sort of this silver bullet for getting healthcare to everyone, as Fabio, you know, and I'm sure everybody else who's implemented a deeper telemedicine plan this year knows, that's not always the final solution. So I'll let you respond at that. I'll let all of you respond at that level. But I'd love to talk a little bit about new models, like Peter, your neighborhood care program, but new models for where you've pushed forward on access or mobility in some way in projects. So if you can think about that too, you know, just give us an example or even something you're considering at this point, or Daniel, something that's conceptual and still on the, you know, on the drawing boards, maybe, in terms of how do we address access, you know, in our projects. But first, let's talk about, I'd love to have someone address quickly the question about telehealth kiosks or bringing telehealth to people.
I could share a couple of thoughts on it. All of our physical buildings, right? As much as we brought in, you know, space for neighborhood care, we brought in, you know, space in a very basic way to conduct more and more telehealth visits. So we built those rooms, right? Part of us, we want to meet you where you are, and if you can't get to us, well, you know, we're still there, and you can still, you know, communicate with us with telehealth. One of our partners, City Block, I found talking to one of their founders, very fascinating. We created some space for them. Again, it wasn't medical office space, but it was space where they have a group of people who really are supposed to spend their time walking around the neighborhoods around our buildings and going to people's homes and going into their homes and meeting them there. All right. And then that brought up a whole nother conversation, well, what's that like? And the founder said something that always struck me, that some of these people that are home, when they come into the doctor office, they feel uncomfortable just in the office environment. But that when somebody from City Block comes into their home and sits with them in their home and speaks to them, they feel like they're getting a visitor from, like, a child or a cousin or a neighbor, and there's like a closeness. And then it brought up another conversation, which goes again to access and this idea of a kiosk. So the City Block people don't exactly have a kiosk, although I love that idea. Like, you can walk around the city now and you see these places to plug in and charge your cell phone, right? But the City Block people actually, bring their phones and small devices, and they're actually kind of, bringing that into these homes where people don't have devices of their own. And then I even started thinking that maybe we should just, ask, do you have a router in your home? Oh, you don't have a router in your home? Well, along with giving you, if you need a walker or a cane or something else, hey, here's a router. We'll install it for you. But I don't think we've gone that far yet.
Yeah,
and the kiosk idea is great. We should put them outside our offices. So when we're not open, right, it's almost like you can go up to the ATM and hit the kiosk. I'm gonna think about whoever asked that question. That's a real good, thought-provoking question.
Yeah, and on that front, I mean, there's a basic idea here around the kiosk as something that can be placed somewhere. But to Peter's point, something just like the kiosk can be literally brought to the patient, and we have developed a program here at New Lab, actually in conjunction with support of Verizon, to bring our own little 5G modem and connect to a high-speed throughway, and actually not only have a kiosk, but a super connected kiosk, if you will, that can enable advanced form of teleguidance and connect those devices to cloud-based system that they make them smarter. So it is something that I think it goes against the idea of the difficulty of patients of having good internet. I think it's relatively straightforward for us to bring this internet, not only internet, but internet that's secure, fast, and reliable.
Can I just jump in real quick? So I know this is the question, I think, on telemed is more positioned to the health systems, maybe Peter and Randy. But what is interesting to me is, and I think I had this conversation with the panelists the other day, is that the pandemic we had, if we didn't have Wi-Fi or internet, I think the economic and health and every other social order would have collapsed, right? Actually, we were all able to escape. And when we look at something like that, right, the internet should almost be looked at like as health, right? So we should have these accessibilities. So we're in a world now, the internet is literally the greatest library ever created by man and a resource. And I wonder why we are not talking to politicians and or city councils and so forth to say the internet or Wi-Fi should be almost as readily available for these social reasons as water, electric, and gas and so forth. And there are very good reasons. And we can see in third world countries, in fact, communities and societies are starting to surround themselves to almost these internet poles, the cell towers and so forth, which is kind of weird, right? It's become the campfire, and it's not supposed to be there. It was supposed to be of old days. It's supposed to be socially out there. But the question about the pods and so forth could be a great answer to. I like how, Peter, you had said there's these kiosks now in Manhattan that you power up your phone, and actually I see people camped out around these, right? So all they're doing is watching their Netflix or whatever. But if you actually change that to be a pod for telehealth or something, and truthfully, we all need somebody to talk to at any time, right? It doesn't need to be a scheduled time. So sorry I jumped in there, Fabio, and so forth on you.
So Peter, Dan, and Fabio, to your point of having a need for a kiosk, I've got one designed, so we can talk about offline. But that's exactly
it's being shipped in right now, Peter.
There's my plug, right? No, but essentially that's the micro infrastructure sort of module that we are rolling out in Puerto Rico, in parts of Latin America, in parts of Asia, on a very low tech level. Now, so, having station types that are off the grid, that, can work in times of crisis as well, right? So I think it's important to understand healthcare access in times of a storm when, electricity is down and drinking water is not available. And so what do you do? And so, and I'm talking about that in the context of other places, but we're starting to see that more and more in New York, right? When we had Ida come barreling through, right, and Sandy previously. And so, it's not something that we shouldn't be thinking about even in New York. But those sort of kiosks, right, they become exactly what you're saying. They become sort of public landmarks and public sort of gathering points, right? They're reliable places where people know that there's a level of trust in those kiosks, and oftentimes if you engage community in the building or the design of those kiosks, there's even more trust. But they essentially become places that are go-to from the public to access all sorts of types of infrastructure, right? Whether it's water, energy, healthcare, medicine, your vaccination shot, et cetera. And we're seeing that already. In really great results in other places. So why not New York?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in a way, the pandemic has been a great equalizer, right? And so it has really exposed some of the ways in which there are patterns of inequity around the world. I think there's no exceptionalism to New York or really any place else. I have a direct question here for Peter from Franklin Rose. So I'm going to ask it as it's been asked, but then as usual, I think I have a follow-up, more general question for both Peter and Randy. Franklin Rose says for Peter, is Emblem Health in growth mode in terms of real estate acquisition for internal corporate operations or ambulatory care services at this time? So are you expanding?
We have been expanding. We had a footprint that was very traditional that went back, I think, to the 40s when the mayor of New York wanted to sort of self-insure instead of having to buy insurance, from the insurance business that was developing. And there was this concept that there should be a medical office in every neighborhood where everybody lived. And so we covered a lot of them. When I got here, we had like 30 some buildings. And we kept those 30. And we then in 2018, we added 3 offices along a little belt in the Bronx, 149th Street, Hunts Point, and Parkchester. There's a little bit of an area where, the big system up there, for whatever reasons, was just a little north of there. So we did open 3. And they were each about, they were like 10,000. So it had primary, small peds, and some specialties, but obviously we couldn't, have all of them. And then we also then on Staten Island, where we always had 2, one on the north, one on the south, we saw development moving towards, the real far end of Staten Island, around the Staten Island Mall and Richmond Avenue. And there was a lot of talk about trying to get into kind of healthcare should be retail, and there's opportunities, because all these retail spaces. So we went in to a new part of the mall, right, where we're next to like a beauty supply company and right across the street from Shake Shack, right? So that was an expansion. And then we opened a new site in Jackson Heights, which we're really excited about because that is a very diverse community. We had not been there. We would have told you we're only 5 miles away. You could go to Elmhurst, or you could go to Forest Hills, or you could go to Flushing. So why would we, some people said, well, why do you want to build so close when you have other ones, right? And we go, we think we want to expand. We can reach, more people by meeting them where they are. And that was an interesting, building too, when you talk about zoning, right? The developer had put up a building that had one of these mini Targets, food services, Starbucks, some of the other ones you would expect. Second floor, zoned for community health care use. And people thought a little bit funny about expanding, in a building that's commercial below. You're going to have food odors and traffic and deliveries. But yes, we're expanding. Then at one point we started trying to count. Well, can we go to 45? Can we go to 50? And I think the leadership's mind is still open. Yes, we can expand more.
That's wonderful. Jumping off of that, Randy and Peter, certainly, in the commercial real estate world, when we're talking about workplace, or if you're talking about, schools and education facilities, there's been a lot of thinking and rethinking about sort of what are the broader models for how those facilities are distributed in cities. So, now we're talking about hub and spoke. And even before the pandemic, there was this whole kind of, co-working revolution and stuff like that. Certainly there was a wave of new manufacturing or industry 4.0 that where Fabio is sitting, New Ink is kind of part of the new lab is kind of part of that wave in New York City. There's been a lot of churn. In healthcare, I know there's been a lot of talk about, well, what is the model in terms of is it the hub of the big healthcare facilities and the neighborhood clinics? Is it something else? Just how have you been thinking about just the pattern of your development or growth in terms of bringing healthcare to where people need it, but also thinking about where it is possible for you to put in the infrastructure and the sort of the standard of care that you would need. I mean, you can't do everything in a neighborhood clinic, and so, how are you thinking about the balance between those things?
I think Randy's got to talk to that first.
Right. So thanks, Peter. So, and let me I wanted to add one other comment to the telemedicine kiosk. We're exploring different ways of leveraging that technology. But currently today, what's very active, we do home visits, right? So we have paramedics doing home visits, medical students from our Hofstra School of Medicine, homebound visits. We take the lab out to home visits as well. We have LabFly, which is an excellent product to really help, again, searching for ways to overcome access issues. And then for the most recent question, Avi, and everyone, part of it falls back on my previous answer about bringing things into the community, but so much of what we do really is ambulatory based, just for those reasons. I think eventually hospitals will be really dinosaurs, right? It'll be major birthing centers, very complex surgical centers, and incredibly critical care, super ICU locations of care, where so much will be taken care of in these ambulatory surgery centers sprinkled around the landscape and in the communities, primary care locations. You read the newspapers, right? CVS, Walmart, Amazon, all getting into the action and really enhancing access to care. And we've been partnering as well with some of those players to really be able to add value to providing better access to care out there. Because, so much is in that ambulatory arena, such that, it's possible in the not too distant future, someone who's rushed to the emergency department and they're very ill, after they get stabilized, might get sent right back home. But before they get home, the hospital bed company will beat them there and deliver the hospital bed. The physician and nurse will go out and set up that type of telemedicine that you're talking about, ensuring all of the proper connectivity to monitor the physio signals of that patient, and then continue that monitoring over telemedicine. So again, we're going to be migrating sort of away from the traditional hospital today into, or what we envision, just units and units of patients versus birthing centers, super surgical centers, and truly the sick of the sick, critical care patients being in there, and building the rest out there. So we're very focused on meeting the ambulatory needs of our communities, right, all over Long Island and through the 5 boroughs of the city, and expanding a little bit further into New York as well.
If I may just follow up with Randy and Peter, it's just a question, that's come to mind as I've worked with communities. A lot of the problem with healthcare access is a level of anonymity. In other words, we don't have the small town mentality in New York of everyone going to the same doctor, right? I mean, there's not the one PCP in the zip code that everyone knows and is familiar with, and there's a level of trust and comfort because your neighbor goes to the same doctor, right? And so I don't know. I mean, it's a question. Is there a way to kind of leverage sort of a face to the neighborhood care center, Peter, that you're talking about, that becomes the face of that zip code, right? That people know to go to ask questions for a neighborhood care coordinator, I don't know, or Randy with these home visits, it's probably messy with insurances and everything else, but how can there be sort of this 5-block radius, this is the care team that always gets deployed to that, area. Maybe this was already happening, but I think that a lot of it is word of mouth and trust. And so it's just an open question.
Randy, you're on mute.
Thank you, Avi. And the sign came up at the same time. So our population health team is making strides towards that as well, just to sort of get that small town comfort while maintaining HIPAA compliance at all times, and really super dedicated to reaching out into the communities and doing that type of care as well. So they know the faces, right? Even as big a footprint as we have, it really isn't that big at the end of the day, right? It's a small world and getting smaller through technology. So absolutely, we don't have all those answers yet, but we have some smart people working on those, Farzana.
I like that question from a designer, right? And we're talking a little bit from, a community of designers. Designers sometimes have, ways of imagining things, right? So I thought it was a really imaginative question. You started out with the question, do we have hub and spoke? Yes, we have it. It's been a tradition. We have that. So my question would actually go back to Farzana or any other designers who are listening. How would we achieve what Farzana is asking? We're opening the neighborhood cares. We're opening more of them. We're accessible. You can find us, right around the corner. You already know where Starbucks is. Now you know we're next to Starbucks. But the idea of a face, that's kind of a whole nother. I think I would ask a designer, how are you going to help us imagine what that would be like?
The first answer to me is, a combination of outreach on the ground, and then also a combination of leveraging social media. So, and I know that that's kind of counter it's almost anonymous to be on social media, but, I think social media connects people into networks, right? For better or worse, for better or good, or not good, not so good. But I think that, there are community networks already that exist, and to kind of tap into them and offer that face into the mix, maybe a starting point.
Yeah, the community outreach. I think we all dive into projects independently without like what I was saying before, just take a step back. Randy, you used the word before, it was just said common sense. And we tend to take our professional job and I know the rules and steps and we get lost. we take a step back and you go to whether it's faith-based operations or whatever the community is really believing in to help as a voice to that. Again, whether it is a outreach program, it doesn't have to be faith-based or such. It is a huge entity. I want to take just a spin on that, Peter. I love it. So HDR had an opportunity to have a question like that come to us about the tri-state area, and they said, "What could you best do to help the health systems and so forth?" And I said, "In truth, get designers and architects and engineers to be educated in this aspect before they even leave college." And we actually had helped put together an accredited New York Institute of Technology with a master's in architecture of health and design from HDR, to the point of we need individuals to be thinking of that before leaving, and all of these other aspects. And if you want, we could put some of these questions into think tanks on thesis students who could probably spend a whole year of coming out with the greatest free labor. Let's not say that out loud, but there are real answers there. And that generation has social aspects of social media and connectivity to communication that is just really, we've never seen anything like this in the advent of humankind in history. So communication is key, and to listen, and then just not to float above and say we're just dropping in something here. Be part of the communities. So
yeah. Well, we're right about at our time today, and in response to what you said, Dan, I think I will say that there's never been a more exciting time to be in designing for health. And so for anybody who's interested in doing that, I mean, we are surrounded by conversations around health now, for better or for worse. And we are, I think, have asked so many of the right questions today in terms of access and equity and mobility and the experience of communities. And we've looked at so many exciting new models, including Ponto Care's own model, but so many others. For example, you've brought up a few. We have the kiosk questions. There's just so many ways, so many tools in our arsenal, and we have to imagine others yet, as Daniel, you just said. So there's so much to be done, and this is one of the most exciting challenges we have, especially in this country where healthcare isn't always intuitive or easy to some communities. So thank you all so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you also to our sponsors, Arcom, Arden Studio, Growy, Alex Houses, and Versteel for supporting today's event. Thank you to HDR for hosting us and for putting this power panel together. Yes. Thanks to everyone in the audience for listening to us today. Think Tank Thursdays will be back next week with a conversation about how we can design for both productivity and equity in the workplace, talking about different tools that we can put in place for equitable work. So I do hope you'll join us for that next Thursday, same time at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks everyone again for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening.